The educator Dr. Maria Montessori once said,
"The child developing harmoniously and the adult improving himself at his side make a very exciting and attractive picture."
Welcome to Montessori Education with me, Jesse McCarthy, where we talk raising children and educating students while bettering ourselves right alongside them. For those of you out there who don't know a lot about Montessori, do you ever wonder what really goes on in a Montessori classroom? Or if you're actually a Montessori teacher, maybe you're curious how other guides handle things with children in their classrooms. So today I chose to have someone on who is going to offer a peek into her environment or her own classroom. This particular teacher, Alessandra Aristimuño, born in South America, is very unique for me personally, as she's actually my wife. And incidentally, if you've been listening to the podcast for some time, you might recall her as my first ever guest. Alessandra's been in Montessori for nearly 7 years now, 5 of which have been as a head teacher in a children's house classroom. So that's with around 24 boys and girls in total, roughly ages 3 to 6, and usually with one assistant teacher. Now, I knew Alessandra when she began in Montessori as an assistant working with children as young as 18 months, so with toddlers. She was lucky to have a very effective guide back then as, kind of mentor. And I remember Alessandra absorbing everything she could from that experience. She just struck me as a super observant person with a big willingness to learn. And nothing has changed in that regard, at least from my perspective. Now, though, Alessandra is a rock star Montessori teacher herself. And that is not just according to me, who's, clearly biased, but to countless parents over the years who have just heartfeltly and genuinely raved about her work with their children. In talking with Alessandra today, what I wanted to do is kind of put you into her classroom so you can, in a way, observe things for yourself, kind of get a feel for what it's like from a teacher's perspective, or at least from one teacher's perspective. Overall, Alessandra will be sharing 3 stories from her experience. One is going to be super familiar for many of you parents and teachers out there, as it's about a child who doesn't want to clean up. Another is around reading and mixed ages. And the last has to do with a, quote, difficult child who he finally discovers work that he just loves. Also, a cool addition at the end, Alessandra gives some quick guidance for parents and teachers. I'm hoping you'll gain from it all and, just enjoy the storytelling. If after listening to our conversation, you have questions or suggestions or whatever, really, head over to montessorieducation.com and feel free to reach out. All right, let's get going here. Alessandra, always a pleasure speaking with you. How's it going today?
Going very well, thank you.
Nice. I know we're not in the same spot, so we're kind of talking over the phone or Skype here. So, I like to just hop right in. So you told me this story a couple days ago. Think about this one girl who, and many parents will relate to this, and definitely teachers will relate to this. She had finished some activity, I think it was on the easel, and she just did not want to clean it up. You remember the story that I was talking about right now?
I do remember it. So Samantha, at the end of the day, Samantha, we are all doing our tasks. So the children have different tasks that they help for the next day. So sharpening the pencils and cleaning the easel and other things like this. And Samantha, she's about 5.5 at the time of this, when this happened. And she had cleaned the easel many times before. But on this day, she was not wanting to clean the easel. She was whining, she was pouting, she was flopping her body in disappointment. And she just refused to do the easel. She said, "I don't want to do this. It's too hard. It's so boring." And I've seen this behavior before, but it seemed weird to have it regarding the easel, which she has been so happy to do before, and she knows how to do so well. So my first response was, "Oh, wow. I understand you don't want to do the easel. It really sounds like you don't want to do the easel today. You don't want to clean it." And she already.
And so, you're just saying that it's kind of like, for people that are listening to this podcast often, that's that first step is empathy. That's what you normally are doing in the classroom, right? If you have a problem like this.
That's right. I'll empathize with, I'll mirror their emotions. So basically say exactly what they're saying to me. So they understand that I get what they're coming from. I understand what they feel. And then I move on to the next step.
Cool.
So my next step in this case was to offer Samantha to start off together. So even though she's done this before many times and she knows how to do it very well, I mean, at times she's almost overdoing it. So this time I decided, let's go together. We'll start it off together and we'll go from there. So we started off cleaning the easel, drying it. I did just a little bit, just a tiny bit of it. So I got the sponge wet, squeezed it out, and I started cleaning off the easel. And then I said, okay, how about you do some of it? And I stayed with her a little bit and we got chatting just a little bit, not 30 minutes of a huge long conversation, just briefly. And then she got excited about it again. Just, yes, I remember how to do this. So I walked away for a little bit and I said, okay, I'm going to come back and we'll continue whatever is left. And when I came back, a few minutes later, she was just jolly, like as if she had not been disappointed and whiny and annoyed before. She just, yeah, this is actually kind of fun, she said. She actually said, this is kind of fun, actually. Those are her quoted words that I wrote down back then.
And just to be clear, before, when she first started, she was like, I'm having nothing to do with this. Like this, I'm not doing this, basically.
That's right. She was determined to get away from the activity.
I just raised this because this wasn't like, how much longer after when she was complaining about it and so forth was this kind of change around, this turnaround for her?
I mean, I would say between 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah.
It was pretty quick. I think the first step of acknowledging her emotions or mirroring her emotions. Yes, I understand you don't want to do this. You find it very boring. That first step usually helps a lot. Mm-hmm. And then the following step in this case of me offering to do it with her and just to get started, not to do the whole thing, not for me to do it for her or to just give the task to another child. It was, you know what, I get it. Let's get through this together sort of mindset for me. And it must have been about 5 to 10 minutes
total
when she said those words of, oh yeah, this is kind of fun actually.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm raising this and I think what was so cool to me about hearing this story when you first told it was that the idea, a lot of parents and a lot of teachers, I mean, particularly, when we're in Montessori, it's all about independence. The child should be able to do it. And we forget sometimes that even as adults, there's sometimes where I don't really feel like doing something. I mean, I know us at the house, like maybe I don't want to fold laundry or something like that. You're like, hey, can you help out? And we'll both do it together. And all of a sudden we're chatting. It's like it's a cool experience. It's not anything horrible. Where when I began, it was like, I want nothing to do with this right now. So it's kind of a natural thing sometimes to not want to do activities we have to do, right? I mean, you feel the same way, or am I kind of crazy here?
No, I feel exactly that way. And, for adults, we see certain activities that the child is doing as a point to reach, right? So we're going to reach the point at which this child, be it Samantha or whatever child, is going to be so independent and so motivated that they will clean up all on their own. But we forget that these reaching points are not final. So even Samantha, who has perfect ability and usually high motivation to clean the easel, this one day she just did not want to do it. She found it so long, so complex, so boring. Mm-hmm. But with a simple, well, I don't know, simple, but a quick understanding and action together, she was able to turn around. And I didn't really go over the top. You can do this. We are going to do it together. We can conquer everything. Yeah. It was just a simple, hey, I get it. I know where you're coming from. Let's just do it together. Very simple.
I like that addition because it's, as you're saying, it's very basic. We're not going into some like long-fledged, wow, we all get sad sometimes. We don't want to do things and just starting to make it a big thing. So I like that you added that. So cool. And for me, I get this a lot from parents that, a child says maybe one day like, "Oh, can you tie my shoes?" And I mean, if it's a rare thing, it doesn't need to become this big thing. No, you're an independent child. You're an independent big girl, so you should always tie. It's just that maybe one day you do it for. So it's not a huge deal because we're talking about independence long range.
Exactly. And one thing I would say is just for us, the adults, just whether we're the teacher, the assistant teacher, a parent, and whatever we're the adult around, just to watch out how often the child is doing this and how often are we offering this type of help. Because if this happens on a daily basis or almost daily basis, that wouldn't be beneficial for the child or the adult. It wouldn't be. But if this is happening, I mean, once in a blue moon, then I would say it's not a problem at all. And we wouldn't be interfering with their independence and development. It's just a normal occurrence in one's life, whether one is a child or an adult.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. So I appreciate you sharing that one. I mean, what I love being around Alessandra, she'll come home and she has stories for days. I mean, every time she comes home from school, there's some great story. So one that you raised, Alessandra, that I found, it just was very fitting for Montessori, and particular about children reading in Montessori, which I love the experience. And your story, I think what was her name, Mackenzie. It was about it was an element of learning, I don't know, getting better at reading and then sharing what she knows with another child in some way. So can you share that story? I'm assuming you remember this one.
Right. Yes, I do remember it. So Mackenzie had been reading a few books, and she was
How old is Mackenzie, by the way?
She is about 5.5.
Okay, so she's older in the primary classroom as well. Okay.
Yes. And she had been reading all kinds of different books, and we got to this one, and we were reading it together. It was, I think, her first time reading it. And as she was reading it, we encountered some words that I wasn't for sure she knew. So when she got to the word tend, as in tend to a garden, I asked her if she knew what that meant. I asked, "Do you know what tend means?" And she did not know. So I explained to her and I said, well, tend means when you take care of something like a garden or a plant. And she kind of nodded and I was like, okay, thank you. Moving on. And then this book continues talking about this one plant, and it said bud. It was talking about this flower that was in a bud. And I asked her, do you know what bud means? It wasn't obvious from the context. And so she said, no, I don't know what it means. So I explained to her very simply, and it was funny because I'm using my hands to explain and visually show that a bud is when the flower is closed. And then when it blossoms, it opens up into the full flower. So she finished reading the book, and we both moved on to our own activities, separate. To my amusement,
what do you mean you both moved on? Like what does that look like?
Well, after reading the book, I stood up and walked away, and I let her either read the book again or put it away and choose some other activity. So we just kind of each went separate ways.
I see what you're saying. Okay.
And a few moments later, I see that this same girl, Mackenzie, was reading the same book to a group of 3 or 4 children who are about 3 years old, like all of the youngest children in the classroom. And she's sitting on the floor reading to these children. And I have this topic because
the people out there like listening, and I get to experience this. I love when you're telling these stories. You're very visual. So I get this sense like I'm seeing Mackenzie, and she's just got like these little children around her and she's reading to it. Like, is it like a circle around her, or how are they sitting? You remember?
I mean, it wasn't super like a proper circle, but it was just like, it was nothing formal. It was just, I've got this book. It goes at the bottom of the shelf and there's these little children around me. So let me just read it to you all.
Yeah, I love it.
know?
Cool.
And so it wasn't super formal circle, but it was definitely a mini gathering, like
Yeah.
I think it was like 3 girls and then Mackenzie was reading to them. And to my surprise, and not so much surprise, but it's just so lovely to see. Mackenzie is reading the pages of the book, and when she gets to the sentence that has the word tend, she asks the 3 little girls, "Do you know what tend means?" And they answer no. They just shake their heads. No, we don't know what that is. She says, "Well, tend means to take care of something like a garden or a plant." And they're like, "Okay, thank you for telling me this." And they just wanted to be there with that girl and listen to the story.
Yeah.
And then she gets to the sentence that talks about bud. And Mackenzie stops and asks the younger children, "Do you know what bud means?" And they again shake their heads. "No, we don't know what that means." So she goes on to explain that bud is when a flower is closed. And she's using the hand motions exactly that I had just used about 10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And so they moved on, and, she finished the book and they wanted to hear it again. And it, the whole day continued developing, but I was in such awe to see how the absorbent mind, and I don't know if you want to explain that right now or if you've touched upon that before, but children they really get what you're saying. And it's not always this is the same way that they'll show you, but everything that you say and do, whether they're imitating you exactly or it's just an impression that later on they're going to put together with something else, it is just fascinating to see how that works. And for me, this was, how clear cut can it be for me to see it in front of me just 10 minutes after we had gone through that tend and bud situation,
Yeah, and just real quick, I think I've talked about the absorbent mind. I must have talked about it on this podcast, but whatever the case, the absorbent mind is kind of what you're saying. You might say something to a child, and they literally their minds are kind of taking it in, and later it'll just pop up out of nowhere. I know some parents know this as. I think you also told me some example where one of the children was saying he was using a word for H, and he said hustle. And you were kind of laughing because it was like we were talking about it. Maybe the dad's like, "Oh, you got to hustle, son," making kind of a silly thing about it. You gotta work. But they absorb, and parents know this because they'll absorb sometimes some things you're saying at home, maybe that you don't want them to absorb, and then they'll say it other places. But generally they take in what we say, and man, it just comes out. And in this case, it might be something beautiful because they're really imitating you, and then they're able to share it with other children around them. And you didn't mention this, but just the idea that there's mixed ages in that classroom and how casual, like you've created an environment for these children where they feel comfortable enough to say, "Hey girls, why don't you come over?" Whatever she said, and just read to some of their friends. Like, it's just such a beautiful environment. I'm kind of jealous.
That's definitely one of my favorite elements of a Montessori environment. Her discovery of mixed ages and how natural the dynamics flow is amazing to me.
Yeah. Well, cool. Yeah, I like that story for many different reasons, but I love when you tell these stories to me, because again, I get all sorts of different stories. It's just such a visual thing for me to see this occurring. And then when I think of the contrast, when, traditional daycare or whatnot, it's almost always the teacher reading to a large group of children that are basically the same age. And the children don't get that opportunity. Like Mackenzie wouldn't get that opportunity to kind of share with others what she had gained from you. So I think there's a great example of a couple elements of Montessori that really pay off and that children just really enjoy, and that we get to enjoy as adults, whether parents or teachers looking on. So thank you. There was another one. Let me think. I think I actually wrote a comment on this one. So I don't remember what this boy's name, but I remember this was a while back, and there was a child that, I think you just started at this particular school. And so it's already challenging with a new school, but there was one boy that was super difficult for you. But he wound up getting super engaged in some material. You know the story I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So you know the boy.
I remember that, yes.
You want to tell me about it, or are we just gonna This is the kind of conversation Alessandra and I have late at night when she's ready to pass out, and I'm like, come on, tell me some more stories. She's like,
Yes, so I do remember that story and the boy. So as you mentioned, this was at a school I had just started at, and we're in the process of adaptation. I am a new guide in here, so the children are getting used to me. I'm getting to know them better, so we're all figuring out each other. And in the midst of all the energy and emotions and busy classroom, there was this one boy. His name was Alex, and he just really stood out. I mean, mostly positive, but in this case, it was pretty difficult at times, for sure. He was bouncing around, literally jumping, and he would run with his friends in the classroom and giggle in the middle of a story and giggle during lunch. I mean, pretty tricky, and it's not the first time or second time that this has occurred in one of my classrooms, but it's...
By the way, I like, sorry to cut you off, but I like how, all of a sudden you're talking very calmly and explaining this, but in the moment, like you say it was tricky, but this was a real challenge when it was actually happening for you, right?
Oh, yes, for sure. I mean, it was not... Yeah. It's not just like, oh yeah, look at this going on. I am just so, I try of course, I'm not necessarily showing how difficult it is for me, but inside I'm just like, oh wow, what am I going to do here? This is pretty crazy. That's how I'm thinking of it,
Okay, because I raised that because clearly, I mean, you've had colleagues. I definitely have colleagues. I've worked with children where it can be really stressful, particularly if it's a brand new school. You're supposed to be, this teacher who can take care of anything, and you've got some difficult children and one boy who's jumping around, you say running with friends, I mean, just running in a classroom. So I know you've got some crazy distance from it now since it's been a while, but in the moment, this was intense.
Yeah, it definitely was. And it wasn't just on one day. This was happening pretty often, on a Monday, on a Tuesday, on a Wednesday, and then all over again, Monday, Tuesday. So throughout the days and weeks, I was constantly, it's like, what am I going to show this child? What am I going to do? Should I start a new circle time, or should I read him a book? Or if only he could read and knew the letter sounds, because then, I mean, if he knows how to read a little bit, there are so many things that he could be doing about reading, but that wasn't his interest. So I remembered this piece of advice that I've heard many, many times, and it's basically keep trying lessons until you find what the child is interested in, and he or she will stop the chaotic behavior, because he'll just want to do that activity so much that he won't be even interested in jumping around and running. And so, went with that advice and kept on showing different activities. Let's do the reading activities, let's do the sounds, let's do the numbers, and all sorts of different things until we got to the puzzle maps. So the puzzle maps is, for those who don't know what the puzzle map is, it is a cutout map with all the countries as a piece of a puzzle. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, so you're talking like, I mean, you've got South America, there's the different countries in South America, and you would pick them up and like, oh, Venezuela goes here, Peru goes here, and you just pick it up.
Right. So instead of a typical looking puzzle, it's the big shape of South America, for example, and then it's got each individual country is a piece of the map.
Yeah, and it's not labeled Peru or Venezuela, that type of thing.
That's right. It's not labeled. It's just a little piece of the shape of the country.
Cool.
So we got to the puzzle maps, and that was what made the turn. I mean, Alex to me, it was such a shock. I stared at him just like, wow, what have I been doing without the puzzle maps all this time? It just seems so obvious, but of course
you had been trying, like, doing math activities, or what? You were just trying other
I was trying different
Let's hear
things
it.
from the practical life area, and pouring, or maybe slicing apples, that is a little bit more difficult. And maybe, this boy must have been about just below 5, but not a young 4, so almost 5 maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And he was so happy and interested and eager to keep doing more puzzle maps. Like, we started off with a continent, where each continent is a piece of the puzzle, and then we did the names of it, and he remembered them all. So then I thought, okay, well, let's get into North America, and we'll do the names of the countries in North America, and nailed them, all of them. Remember where Haiti goes, where Panama goes, where Mexico goes, all of them. Like, wow, this is pretty impressive. Let me show him how he could make the puzzle. So how we had it back then in that classroom was the child could trace each country on a piece of colored paper, then push pin it out, and then paste it. So it's a pretty lengthy
That's a process.
And some children are all about it, some children are not into it at all. And Alex was one of those that is very much into that activity.
Yeah.
And so he made a map of North America, and he made it himself. He painted the ocean around North America, and he traced every single country on colored paper. He pinned it out, and then he pasted all the different pieces onto the blue paper.
Yes, I got to stop, because it's so, to think about what's happening here. Like, you had a child that was running around, fooling around in the classroom with other children. You're trying everything, and as not an early teacher, but you have a new class, new kids, it's like, oh, what can I do? It's a little bit stressful. You tried a bunch of activities, brought them to these puzzle maps, and then you see engagement. And not only engagement, but like, I mean, think about the listeners out there, myself. Do we know every single country in North America? Like, there's a lot going on there. And then he didn't only remember those countries and be able to put them in the puzzle, but you're saying he used the pin puncher to do it out, and then he pasted it all together, and he created his own North America. Like,
right.
That was the final product.
Yes, that's right. And he also did that for South America, and then for Africa. He had to know, it was like, I want to do Africa one. And I was like, oh, okay, you want to do Africa? And mind you, I had to, Africa pieces, I have to review them every once in a while, because I don't remember all of them.
Yeah, I mean,
so
imagine, like, if you're listening, anybody who's out there listening right now, Google Africa and just see how many countries are in Africa. I mean, I wonder what percentage of listeners, I'll include myself, actually know all the countries in Africa. That's insane.
Yeah, and I myself wouldn't know them if it wasn't because I have to teach them to other people. So yeah. I'm in a great position, because when I get asked some of these things, like, let's do Asia. I mean, Asia was a big one for me to remember all the different countries, and so many of them are near each other. So, well, obviously they're near each other, but anyhow, he was just over the moon, and to the point that when we would get into lunchtime, he wanted to do the puzzle. When it was playtime, he wanted to still do the puzzle. I was like, well, Alex, like, sure, if you want to, but you all can always come back to it as well. You don't have to just skip the playtime or snack or whatever it is we're doing. And even one time, one day was pickup time, and his grandma had arrived, and already I had let him be the last one to kind of gather his items so that he could just get a little bit extra time getting this puzzle together. He was making it. So at this point, he was gluing the pieces that he had already pinned out.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was already the last moment of the day. It's like, Grandma's here. Get your stuff. And he just looks at me and he just says, I don't want to go home. I want to finish my map. And I thought, oh, wow. I was so happy about that piece of advice. And it always comes back to me in my current classroom. I mean, it's not easy. It's not like, oh yeah, sure, puzzle maps, boom, surprise. It's a lot of work, and it's not a couple days. Sometimes it is a couple of days.
You mean, you're saying to, like, find something that engages the child or interests the child, some material work.
Yes, like, to curve that behavior, right?
Yeah.
That, we're all adapting, and sometimes it's in the middle of the school year when it's like, there is no adapting to do. This is, what we're doing, But even then, as Maria Montessori writes about this, and I know you've put it in some of your posts as well. Progress is not linear. So even if it isn't a time of adapting to a new classroom or whatever, it's not linear. So there will be times when this type of behavior just occurs, you know, and it with Samantha, it took 5 minutes, right? From going to the easel, I don't want to do it, to, oh, wow, this is actually kind of fun. But then with Alex, it wasn't 5 minutes. It wasn't 5 days. It was a couple of weeks. And, you know, the process of still you try another lesson, and it's, nope, not interesting. I'm going to go back to running.
I so appreciate you kind of emphasizing this, because I mean, it really, one thing is in terms of behavior issues, quote, behavior issues, at its core, and I think this is what Montessori says, the ultimate way to solve that is through work that's engaging, work that's exciting, that you found for this child. And something just comes to mind is that a lot of older children, or even young adults, when they get out of school, they don't know what they want to do. I mean, I definitely was one of them. And it's okay to try different things out. It's kind of like this is a small version of when you grow up and you're trying to figure, what do I really want to do? And you can try things out. And some things you're not going to be excited about in the beginning, you know, and you might find something that really engages you. So I just love that children in this classroom are able to experience that because their teacher is open to, well, let's see what you do enjoy, and we'll take you over to this thing. So
right, and it you know, it wasn't just me. I mean, this is Maria Montessori writing about it and sharing different experiences. But when you can reach a point of that you remember those words that one reads in Maria Montessori's book, and think about it in those crucial times of frustration or desperation, even at times in the classroom, like, oh wow, what am I supposed to do now? In those moments when we can remember even just a brief little something of Maria's books, or of Dr. Montessori's books, then it's really, then it becomes all encompassing. You know, it's not just a book that I read at home or in the training, and it's not me that I'm just such a miraculous teacher. It's a combination of work that I do on my own, and then reading, and then practicing, and then messing up and doing it again. So it's
becomes a part
development, you know, it's just like the children, we are too. And so it was very wonderful for me to see this happening in front of me. And then ever since then we figured out that Alex and myself, we just kept going at it, you know, new lesson. Then he got excited. Then months later, we got into reading, and he was reading words with double E and double O. I mean, it was a huge transformation, but it did not start off like this, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, just reinforcing the idea that, you know, as you say, progress is not linear from Montessori, but these type of things, they don't happen overnight, or occasionally they do, but it's the rare case. So you got to stick it out and just keep at it, you know? And I mean, it's hard, we can say that, but in the moment it's very hard. So I appreciate you sharing this one, because it's like Montessori's works, they have to become a part of you. And you know, you can read them and say, oh, that makes sense abstractly, but until you really practice it and see it with your own eyes, it's sometimes hard to believe. You know, because I'm imagining this child, Alex, if somebody saw him in the early days of that class, they're going to be like, oh, here, we got a troublemaker. He's going to be a difficult one. And they're giving all these names to the child. And maybe that child never has the experience that, you know, that he has with you. And he becomes that troublemaker. You know, because he just didn't find something that he was really engaged in. He didn't have the environment that allowed for that type of discovery. So, and I like, I mean, you're basically saying, hey, it's Montessori, she's the one who did it. But, you know, without teachers like you and so many hundreds of others that I've met over the years, and then parents that are doing similar things at home, it wouldn't happen. You know, it would just be an idea in a book that some woman, you know, 100 years ago wrote. So I know what you're saying to say, you know, Maria Montessori, and I adore the woman, but it's teachers living today and parents that are really making this happen. So I appreciate you doing this. Not just because you're so special to me personally, but well, cool. I think I want to get closing up here because I was trying to do maybe like 3 good stories, and I think we've got some goodies. But maybe, and just finishing up, is there anything, quick guidance? I think there's a lot packed into the stories that you have, but is there any, just maybe some quick guidance, parents that might be listening, hey, this might help, and then maybe teachers too. If you have it, if you don't, then forget it. We can end here. It's up to you.
I mean, I would like to just go back to the first story and the principle behind that even our children, like our personal children, our own children, or the children in the classroom, there might be a day or two when they're just not in the mood. Like we might not be in the mood of something, and it is okay to help. We're not ruining their independence or making them dependent on us. So I think that would be super helpful for parents to know, because I see it sometimes, during drop off or pick up. No, you know how to carry your lunchbox. You're a big girl. You're a big boy. So I think that would be, something to keep in mind, with also how often are you doing it and how often is the child coming into it. So I think that would, just going back to that. And I would say that for new teachers, or for any teacher, I mean, it's happening to me right now, and I'm having to revisit it. Maria Montessori, in the Creative Development in the Child, Volume 1, she writes about the collective stage. And I won't get into it right now, but if you are a guide or a teacher or an assistant teacher, and you seem like you're in a classroom where it seems like a one big mess day after day, minute after minute, I think that is a great place to go and get inspiration and guidance at the same time. I think it's page about 182, but anyhow, that's very specific, but it's called the collective stage. And it basically is something that happens in the classroom, and I think I discovered not so long ago. So yeah.
All right. So you kind of leave it at, hey, if you really want to do the work, go out and find it. Yeah.
Yeah. I won't get into it now, but if it sounds like the description I gave just a minute ago is happening in the classroom right now, or it was recently happening, I think that's a great place to visit Maria Montessori's writings, Creative Development in the Child, Volume 1.
Nice. Yep. And I'll put a link. Hopefully that book, you can purchase it. I'm pretty sure you can. So I'll put a link to the publisher of that. So cool. Well, thank you for taking the time out of your day. I know you have the day off, so I appreciate you taking the time during your relaxing time.
A pleasure. It is a pleasure.
Well, pleasure on my end too. I hope everyone enjoyed, and adios.